The next step in the project is for me to service the forks, and this should be relatively straightforward. So what the plan is to take them apart, take the springs out, drain the oil out of it, change the fork seals, put it all back together, put some fresh oil in it, job sorted. Let's just hope it's that simple. I have some very high quality Motul fork oil, I have some new seals, I have some forks. Let's get cracking. The first thing to notice on these forks is something's going on a little bit with the fork top. That's not looking particularly nice. There is a lot of file marks across there and even down the sides. I'm not quite sure why, but what I am going to do is tidy that up a little bit. There is also a little sort of screw valve thingy in the side here, which looks a bit of a mess as well. So when I get them apart, I will be giving the top caps a bit of attention, but before that, of course, we need to take it apart. So I'm going to get a spanner on there, undo that end, but I'm only going to crack them off to begin with because these are damper rod forks. So all the way down here, and it is a long way, the bolt in the bottom we need to take out to get the damper rod out, which basically attaches the two halves of the fork together. And generally it's easier to get that bolt undone while the spring is inside the fork, because it basically loads the damper rod up and stops it spinning in the fork when you try undo the bolt. So loosen that end, undo that end, try not to get oil everywhere. I've undone the top cap already and it was incredibly loose, which I suppose should be a good thing because it stops me complaining that it's overly tight. Easiest way to get these off is generally impact gun. Put a bit of tension on the top out spring. There we go. That has undone already. So that was nice and easy. So the next thing I need to do is basically stand it up in the sink, take the top cap off completely. There will be a bit of spring pressure that will try and bounce apart a little bit, but it will at least come apart. Right, here we go. Pop that in the sink because I've already undone the bolt at the bottom. There will be oil wanting to come out of it. Just got to keep a little bit of tension on the top cap that you can't see because the forks are that long that you can't actually see it. So slide that down. Right, preload spacer, top cap. There is a washer in between them. A very, very, very long spring. Sort of really got the camera at about the wrong angle for this. My lord, that's a long spring. Look how long that bad boy is. And the oil that's coming out of here looks like it's 40 years old. It might actually be 40 years old. So, look at the state of that. That is horrendous. And there goes the damper rod. And the top out spring. Right. We'll hang that up here for a minute to drain. Yeah. It's a bit minging. Now that most of the oil is drained out of my forks, it's time to take the seals out. So the top seal is just a dust seal. So we're going to get a screwdriver. It's quite an extensive dust seal. It's certainly bigger than you get on most modern bikes. Right, that's the dust seal finally levered out of the way, and it's cracked and split and horrible, so that's not going back anywhere near the bike. And the next thing we need to do is, there's a circlip in here. I need a smaller screwdriver or a pick, and I'm going to get the circlip out of here, fire that down the fork leg, out the way, circlip, and then there is a washer, which you can't see. And when I pull the fork apart, it will pull the seal out and the washer. So this always looks a bit brutal. We'll get a bit of rag at the end so it doesn't fire oil across my workshop. And then you basically hammer the seal out the fork leg. It's coming out. And there we go, look. The forks are apart. And incredibly dirty. Ew. So I've got the old fork seal, the bushes and the washer that sits between the bushes and the seal out. Look at that spring. Look how long it is. This is a whole different world, this sort of stuff. As reference, that's out of a 2007 R6. The forks actually have a similar length of travel. Right, let you draw your own conclusions from all that. Anyway, This is the fork stanchion, and I have it in the vise. If I walk all the way to this end, bushes sit on this end, seal sort of runs up and down here, and the top cap goes down there. Giving it a wash out with some brake cleaner, try and get all the old sludge out of it because the old oil was particularly unpleasant. But that is now nice and clean. Now the bushes, even though they're quite old, there's no play in the fork leg. If I put the fork leg in a vise, which I have done with the pair of them before I started, give them a bit of a wiggle, there is no play. So I'm not too concerned about the bushes. And Kev fully admits this bike is an item for reminiscing. It's not going to get ridden actually probably very much at all. Certainly not going to get ridden particularly hard. So we're not going to be changing anything in the internals. We are literally just doing a service. Because the bike has generally been looked after in its life, there is no pitting on the fork legs, which is basically a miracle because nowadays Suzukis, when they leave the factory, generally have pitted forks in them. So that is definitely a good thing. And the next thing I need to do would be put that back together, but I need to go downstairs and sort fork caps out. Having taken the second fork leg apart, I was expecting to find the equivalent amount of horrendous, black, horrible, dirty old oil. But what I found instead was some brown. This sort of brown. The leg was almost entirely empty of oil. Interestingly, the bushes are actually still in surprisingly good condition, so it must have had just enough oil. Or, of course, the oil's come out of it when the bike's not really being used. And that leads me back to my fork tops. This is the other fork top, and you can see it's been filed across the top for a reason I don't understand. And it's got this sort of little hole in the front of it. Now, I think this would have been some sort of valve for equalising the pressure in the forks. It may have been a sort of Schrader valve type thing for pumping more air pressure into the fork. It does go in there and into a hole down there. You probably can't see it, it's in the shadows. Now this one, this hole is open. So I'm wondering at some point either over the years the oil's actually evaporated out of it, or at some point somebody's had the forks out of the bike, laid them down and the oil's just dribbled on the floor and they've not replaced it. But it's a bit unusual to find an oil empty, a leg empty of oil, and some of the parts inside it quite rusty. So that's a bit unusual. Right, and on that note, it's time to go downstairs and fix these. So what I need to do is make it look a bit prettier, and then, more importantly I suppose for performance, blank off the holes. And these are my two fork top caps, and I've gone for a slightly different finish approach on both of them. What I've done to get rid of the old anodising that was half worn off and half scraped off and just generally looking very tired, was I put them in the shop blaster and it gives it that sort of uniform matte finish. This one I've then attacked with a piece of Scotch-Brite for about 2 minutes, and it's just sort of buffed it up into a slightly more shiny finish. That's matte, that's sort of satin finish I suppose you'd say. What I am going to do is I'm going to pop this in the milling machine and I'm just going to give a light skim across the top because although this one's not too bad, that one's got some more obvious sort of file marks in it. So I'm just going to try and give it a bit more of a machined finish and then decide if I prefer the Scotch-Brite or the machine finish and then basically refinish it again. What fun. So I've got the top cap set up in the vise in the milling machine, and my plan is to have the milling marks running sort of lengthways along the top cap, and hopefully it'll look decent. And now we have this nice uniform machine finish across the top, which I think looks considerably better. Scotch-Brited around the outside so it's satin, a bit of shine on the top. So if I compare that then to the shot blasted one, that's a sort of fairly plain matte finish. This one's got a little bit of sheen on the sides and a nice machine finish on the top, which I think looks considerably smarter. Final bit on the top caps before I actually start rebuilding the forks. I've drilled and tapped the hole in the bottom that sort of let the air in and out of the pointless valve, and put a M4 screw in there. So that's blanked off forever. These things do not need to be there. I have no idea what they're thinking in 1980, but that top cap now looks quite respectable. So, onwards to putting all that lot back together. Having given everything a very thorough cleaning off in the sink, it's time to reassemble. So I've put my bushes back on, the little sort of washer that goes underneath the seal, and then when we go all the way to the other end of the forks, I've put the fork seal on, the oil seal from this end, because this end's got a really nice smooth taper, so the seal goes on without damaging it. And because there's no pitting, I can slide it all the way down. I have smeared the inside of the seal with some of our Motul 10-weight fork oil, and then after the seal there is a washer that doesn't look factory original, but somebody's worked out they need it in there, so I'm going to leave it in. The circlip that's going to hold everything in place, and then the dust seal. So the next thing we need to do is get the outer and slide it down there. Having slid the two parts of the fork together, the bottom and the stanchion together, the next thing we need to do is push the seals in. So I've pushed the bushes back in most of the way, and then we'll slide the seal down, and I have sprayed a little bit of lube around the outside of it to give it a fighting chance of going in nice and easily. So I need to push that in a little bit, like that, and then I'm going to use this. Now, I have got proper seal drivers, but they don't fit in these forks, so I'm going to use this. So this goes around here, move everything else out of the way, and then basically you use this to hammer the seals in. Something like that. And I just have to get the seal in far enough that I can get the washer and the circlip to clip into the hole and actually hold everything together. That is the seal all the way in, the washer that's not original in, the circlip clipped in and located properly, and then we can slide the dust seal down, and this dust seal sort of goes over the outside of the fork, which is a bit different to modern, but with a little bit of wrangling, I'm sure we can get it to slide home nicely. However it's supposed to go. It'll go in a minute. So with the dust cap and everything back on, it's time to put the damper rod back in. Now, this is a damper rod. It is rudimentary. Basically, it forces oil through these holes, and that's pretty much all the damping you get. It's quite crap. So, I'm not expecting great performance from these. You can get like emulators that basically make them feel a bit more like they've got a cartridge with some compression damping. But we're not fitting that. So, this needs to go back inside this tube, followed by the spring, and we can screw everything back together. Right, we're making some progress now. The damper rod is pushed down inside here. The spring is fitted. I've fitted a new copper washer to the bolt that goes in the bottom, and so that needs to go up its little hole. Bolt with the new copper washer on it, up its little bottom, and much like the undoing, an impact gun is quite handy to just wind everything together. The damper rod often has a bit of a tendency to try and spin inside as you're doing stuff up or undoing, and the impact gun just obviously spins it a bit quicker. So just a little click with that, and then we'll do a proper torque setting by hand. With the fork now upright in my low vise, I'm going to take my Motul 10-weight oil, pour it in here, a reasonable quantity because they're, even though quite narrow forks, they are quite long. So get plenty in there, and then I'm just going to stroke the fork up and down a little bit. It's a long stroke on these, and that just gets rid of any air that's trapped in the damper rod. At the bottom of the stroke I can actually feel it. There's like a rudimentary sort of hydraulic bump stop thing that just gives you basically a load of drag at the bottom of the fork where you actually want it least if you're in a corner. But welcome to the olden days. There's a little bit of air in my oil, so I'm going to give it a couple of minutes just for the air to come out of there, and then we'll get the fork level setting tool into it. 192mm air gap, apparently. Alright, fork oil level setting tool, which is basically a big syringe. 192mm it's set to, and you do this with the fork leg collapsed and the spring out, and basically suck any excess oil out of it till you get a slurpy noise. Now all I need to do is slide my spring in, and then my preload spacer and my little washer thing will sit on top, and I can screw my top cap back on when I've got that up here. Simples. So when I get everything properly aligned, a little bit of pressure to push the spring down a little bit, and that has grabbed its top cap, and I can just screw it down. I have lubricated the thread and the O-ring, so it will go together nicely. Happy days. I'll just pop that back in the vise, nip that up a little bit more. And there we have it, a set of surprisingly heavy, very long, but now at least correctly oiled and correctly sealed front forks. A couple of bits I failed to mention when I was actually going through the video. I did actually check the spring free length, and they are 1mm over minimum, so that's okay because there is still intolerance. And I also checked they're actually straight, because that is always worth checking. And everything is happy days, so they can go back towards the bike.